Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Honorable, esteemed panelists, and distinguished guests. Welcome to the first conference ever organized by the Institute of Foreign Affairs and the Jazeera Centre for Studies. This pivotal conference, where we gather to explore the dynamics and complex interplay of national, regional, and continental strategies across Africa in the context of an ever-changing global landscape. Today, we stand at a critical juncture, a moment defined by both tremendous opportunities and profound challenges. As we look around our continent, we witness a remarkable commitment among nations to advance their societies, stimulate economic development, and enhance security. These efforts are essential as Africa strives to secure a significant position on the global stage. However, we must also acknowledge the fragility and instability faced by several countries which threaten national unity and regional coherence. This conference, themed Africa, Navigating Fragility and Capitalizing on International Competition, brought together prominent African and Gulf researchers and academics, aiming to shed light on the strategies and policies that can foster collaboration among African
Your Excellency, Ambassador Ratta Alamu, Your Excellency, Commander Ababa Muluna, Your Excellency, Dr. Izzeddin Abdul Maula, you're here? Okay. Your Excellency, Dr. Izzeddin Abdul Maula, okay. Distinguished guests, panelists, and participants. On behalf of the Institute of Foreign Affairs and myself, I warmly welcome all the think tanks, delegates, diplomats from the Middle East, Africa, Ethiopia, and all around the region and the world. This conference is titled African Challenge of Fragility and Capitalizing on the International Competition. This event is co-hosted by our institute, the Institute of Foreign Affairs, and the Jazeera Centre for Studies, with the aim to address the challenges of fragility and capitalizing on international competition in Africa. As a policy research think tank, the Institute of Foreign Affairs has been committed to conducting data-driven research and organizing events like this at the national, regional, and international level. While the Institute of Foreign Affairs has independently hosted conferences in the past, this conference marks the first occasion that our institute and Al Jazeera Centre for Studies have collaborated on such an important and significant event. I assure you all that this partnership will continue, and we hope that we'll keep hosting discussions on matters of shared concerns for both of our institutes. Excellencies and distinguished guests, A rise in global power competition has exacerbated the existing global crisis, which some termed as an era of global polycrisis. The global geo-economic and geopolitical dynamics have significantly shifted the existing global power arrangement that has been in place since the end of the Cold War. These power shifts resulted in what some called a multipolar order that have resulted in global interstate tensions, war, and a prevalence of violence. To mention some, which is exemplified by the recent Russo-Ukrainian war and the war in Gaza. This era of polycrisis has destabilized Africa's already fragile economic and political landscape. The continent has been indirectly affected by these global wars and conflicts. Asian demand for exporters and foreign investment decisions have been impacted, leading to substantial decrease in foreign direct investments. Moreover, instability has long characterized African states. Even before the recent global crisis, which was triggered by the COVID-19 pandemics, the war in Ukraine, and the recent war in Gaza. Many countries across the continent have been grappling with internal crises and interstate tensions, while others have faced frequent military coups. These challenges are exacerbated by poverty and the attendant economic crisis, population growth and the proliferation of non-state actors, insurgencies, cross-border crisis, resource-based conflict, governance issues, cross-border crimes, and violent extremisms. These challenges have led to the prevalence of weak institutions in Africa, which is a key factor in state fragility in Africa and across the world. The Sahel and the Horn of Africa serves as a compelling example of how global factors such as terrorism, extremism, and organized crime and migration exacerbates state fragility and have devastating effect on development. In addition, these issues create negative spillover effects in other regions. Fragility in conflict-prone regions often exhibit a unique characteristics that hinders effective development in states' institutions. Furthermore, the growing global power competition and the expansion of Middle Eastern power wars in recent times into the northeastern Africa region, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean directly impacts stability in the Horn of Africa and across the continent. Excellencies and distinguished participants, despite promising progress in human development, peace, and stability in the African continent, the emerging great powers competition threatens to upend decades of development progress. International competition for Africa's resources is intensifying, resulting in a heightened struggles for its market and strategic positions. This competition not only exacerbates the continent's existing challenges, both chronic and immediate, but also presents a genuine opportunity to advance and protect Africa's interests in innovative ways, such as partnerships, mutual beneficiary agreements. Excellencies, recognizing these immense challenges we face in this era of poly-crisis. This conference and dialogue and discussion will make a contribution to policy making by exploring critical questions, such as how can African nations effectively balance their national, regional, and continental policies and strategies to foster their interests while addressing the prevailing challenges in the face of shifting global and regional power dynamics. What is the significance of Arab-Africa relations, and how can that be leveraged for improved cooperation between the two regions? By acknowledging the importance of critical discourses, data-driven, knowledge-based exchanges in resolving the complex and unpredictable political, economic, and security challenges that we face today, the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Jazeera Centre for Studies have co-hosted this conference to engage scholars and decision makers on these critical matters. Finally, I wish you all fruitful discussions throughout this conference. May your insights and expertise yield innovative solutions for the continent and beyond. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your warm and notable welcome speech. I was told by the translator that I should be a little bit slow. I'll try. The Al Jazeera Centre for Studies is an independent research institute that aims to present a balanced understanding of the geopolitics of the MENA region and the Arab world in particular. Today, we have among us a remarkable individual from the Al Jazeera Centre for Studies to welcome our esteemed guests. Please join me in welcoming Al Jazeera Centre for Studies Manager of Research, Honorable Dr. Izzuddin Abdul Mullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to speak in Arabic, so those of you who need translation, please use your translation kits. أصحاب السعادة والسيادة والضيوف الكرام من إفريقيا ومن خارج إفريقيا، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله، وأهلا بكم وسهلا في مفتتح هذا المؤتمر الذي ينظمه بالشراكة كل من مركز الجزيرة للدراسات ومعهد الشؤون الخارجية في إثيوبيا. سأقتصر في مداخلتي على 3 نقاط سريعة حتى لا أخذ من وقتكم كثيرا. النقطة الأولى أريد أن أتحدث وأحكي لكم قصة هذا المؤتمر. كنت هنا قبل تقريبا 5 أشهر في أديس أبابا في هذه القاعة تحديدا لأحضر الدورة الثانية لحوار البحر الأحمر، وقبل أن ينتهي الحوار حصلت لقاءات خاطفة بيننا وبين إدارة المعهد، سعادة الدكتور جعفر والدكتور عماري وتصفاية والشباب من هنا، وبسرعة وجدنا أن بيننا أشياء كثيرة يمكن أن نلتقي عليها. 3 مسائل على الأقل. أولا، هناك اهتمامات مشتركة بين المؤسستين، اهتمامات كثيرة. ثانيا، نحتاج إلى التنسيق والتعاون حول هذه الاهتمامات. ثالثا، لدى المؤسستين استعداد كامل لتحويل هذه الحاجة إلى شراكة نجسد من خلالها هذا التعاون. وبالفعل تقريبا بعد أسبوع من عودتي إلى الدوحة عقدنا أول لقاء عبر زوم، تطبيق زوم، وبدأ الحوار حول تنظيم أول فعالية مشتركة. طرحنا مقترحا كنا أعددناه حول إفريقيا والقضايا الإفريقية، ونحن في الجزيرة للدراسات كنا ننظم مؤتمرا حول إفريقيا سنويا. طرحنا هذا المقترح على زملائنا في معهد الشؤون الخارجية، فوجدنا ترحيبا واهتماما. وفي غيرها في حاجة أكيدة إلى التعاون. منطلق مسألة ضرورية جدا، وأحيانا التعاون مطلوب حتى نتجاوز العجز الذاتي لبعض المؤسسات. كثير من مؤسساتنا لا تستطيع أن تنجز أعمالا بمفردها لأن لديها حدود مالية وبشرية وتنظيمية إلى غير ذلك. التعاون يسمح لنا بتجاوز هذا القصور الذاتي لدى الكثير من مؤسساتنا، والتعاون يسهم أيضا في بلورة الأفكار وفي تطويرها وفي إنضاجها، ويسهم أيضا في التشبيك بين الخبراء والمتخصصين في القضايا التي نهتم بها ونناقشها. التعاون يسهم في تبادل الخبرات، وفي حالتنا هذه في بلورة رؤى إفريقية حول إفريقيا وقضاياها المتشعبة، رؤى تتفاعل مع العالم المفتوح المتغير بسرعة وباستمرار، لكن ضمن خصوصيات البيئة الإفريقية تاريخا وجغرافيا وثقافة وتطلعات مشتركة نحو المستقبل تجمع دول القارة ونخبها وشعوبها. طبعا فكرة التعاون ليست جديدة، وهي مطروحة على مستويات أكبر من هذا، مطروحة على مستوى الدول والمنظمات الإقليمية والقارية والدولية إلى غير ذلك، ولكن أردت أن أؤكد على هذا المعنى فيما يخصنا نحن هنا مؤسسات البحث والتفكير. النقطة الثانية حول الإطار العام لهذا المؤتمر، وهو التنافس حول إفريقيا وإمكانية الاستفادة منه على صعيد الفرص التي يتيحها، وأيضا لمجابهة التحديات التي يطرحها هذا التنافس. ولا يخفى على أحد من هذه النخبة الكريمة من الحضور ومن الباحثين والخبراء المتخصصين في الشؤون الإفريقية أن إفريقيا تسيل لعاب الكثير من القوى الدولية الكبرى، نظرا لما تختزنه هذه القارة من ثروات وموارد مادية وبشرية واستراتيجية، تجعل التنافس حولها إحدى أبرز القضايا التي تلفت انتباه المتابعين للشأن الإفريقي. تنافس يتجلى بعضه في القمم الدولية المتعاقبة، مثل القمة الأمريكية الإفريقية، القمة الصينية الإفريقية، القمة الروسية الإفريقية، وغيرها من الأطر التي تجمع قادة إفريقيا بأوروبا، سواء تحت مظلة الاتحاد الأوروبي أو عبر منصات ثنائية مع دول أوروبية مثل فرنسا وإيطاليا وبريطانيا وغيرها. مهم في هذا السياق أن نشير إلى أن التنافس الدولي حول إفريقيا محكوم في جزء منه بإرث الماضي الاستعماري من جهة، وبصراعات محتدمة بين هذه القوى الدولية في مناطق أخرى من العالم تنعكس على هذه القارة وفي ساحاتها. تنافس حول مستقبل العالم وحول امتلاك أدوات التحكم فيه. يتجلى التنافس حول إفريقيا أيضا إلى جانب القوى الكبرى في استراتيجيات قوى وسطى تسعى لتحسين موقعها في النظام الدولي والاستفادة من هذه الديناميكية التي يمكن أن تفضي في نهاية المطاف إلى إعادة توزيع موازين القوى العالمية لتشكيل نظام متعدد الأقطاب. هنا يمكن أن نتحدث عن قوى مثل تركيا وإيران وإسرائيل وبعض الدول الخليجية التي تنافس أيضا حول إفريقيا. في عالم متعدد الأقطاب لن ينظر إلى إفريقيا فقط باعتبارها هذا المجال الجغرافي المحدود، وليست فقط مجرد كنز للثروات الطبيعية والبشرية، وليست فقط مجرد سوق استهلاكي يتنافس عليه الآخرون، بل سينظر إلى إفريقيا من منظور آخر كجزء أساسي من إطار أوسع هو الجنوب العالمي، حيث التحالفات والمؤسسات الدولية والإقليمية تعمل وفق ديناميكيات من مستوى آخر. المستوى الثالث من التنافس حول إفريقيا هو التنافس الداخلي داخل إفريقيا ذاتها بين قوى صاعدة في القارة، بعضها في شمالها وبعضها في جنوبها، بعضها في شرقها وبعضها في غربها. تتداخل العوامل التي تغذي ذلك التنافس بين أجندات وطنية وقارية تسعى للتحرر والنهوض، وأخرى في إطار تحالفات دولية تحول هذا التنافس أحيانا إلى صراع تستخدم فيه الحروب بالوكالة أدوات للهيمنة وتقاسم النفوذ. هذا التنافس بمستوياته المتعددة يحمل في طياته كما تعلمون من الفرص بقدر ما يطرح على بلدان القارة من التحديات. نجد الفرص والتحديات جنبا إلى جنب في التنافس بين القوى الكبرى والقوى الوسطى وبين القوى الصاعدة في القارة ذاتها، وهو ما سنناقشه في جلسات هذا المؤتمر، وهو ما يوصلنا إلى النقطة الثالثة والأخيرة في هذه الكلمة. سنناقش في هذا المؤتمر قضايا الحدود والأمن والهشاشة والفقر والديون والإرهاب والاستبداد والقرصنة والحروب بالوكالة وتحديات العولمة وقضايا البيئة والتغير المناخي وغير ذلك من القضايا التي تهمنا جميعا. وكما ترون هذه القضايا ليست خاصة بإفريقيا في الحقيقة، إنها في أغلبها قضايا ذات طبيعة عالمية، وإن كانت حاضرة في قارتنا بكثافة أكبر. خذ مثلا قضية النزاعات الحدودية، ستجدها في كل القارات. لو نظرنا في خريطة العالم من طرفها إلى طرفها سنجد النزاعات الحدودية في إفريقيا وآسيا وأمريكا اللاتينية وأوروبا. سنجدها بين الهند والصين، بين الصين وروسيا، بين الهند وباكستان، بين أرمينيا وأذربيجان، بين تركيا وسوريا، بين دول الخليج، بين المغرب وإسبانيا. سنجدها في الأمريكتين بين هندوراس وسلفادور، بين الولايات المتحدة وهايتي، بين البرازيل والأوروغواي، بين بوليفيا والبرازيل، بين الأرجنتين وتشيلي، دون اعتبار النزاعات حول الحدود البحرية في كل بحار العالم تقريبا. إذن هذه القضايا ذات طبيعة عالمية، ولكن تهمنا في هذه القارة. وما يميز نقاشنا لهذه القضايا هنا والآن هو أولا السياق العام الذي تحدثنا عنه، هو سياق التنافس الدولي بمستوياته المتعددة والمتنامي على موارد القارة. ثانيا، هذا النقاش سيكون انطلاقا من الخصوصية الإفريقية لهذه القضايا، وإن كانت بالتأكيد التجارب والمنظورات المقارنة أيضا مفيدة جدا في هذا النقاش. إذن في هذا التنافس المحموم وانطلاقا من الخصوصيات الإفريقية لهذه القضايا سيبحث مؤتمركم ومؤتمرنا جميعا في الفرص المتاحة وفي سبل تمكين دول القارة من تحقيق الاستقرار وخفض منسوب الأزمات والتوترات والصراعات والحروب والاضطرابات السياسية والأمنية وغيرها، وفي معالجة أسباب الهشاشة ودفع عجلة التقدم على المستوى القاري. وسينظر كذلك في آفاق التعاون البيني ومتعدد الأطراف. سواء على المستوى الإفريقي أو على المستوى الإفريقي العربي أو على المستوى الإفريقي الآسيوي والإفريقي الأوروبي والإفريقي الأمريكي. كل آفاق التعاون سنحاول أن نطرحها ونناقشها ونبحث في فرصها في هذا المؤتمر، وبالتأكيد أيضا التعاون على صعيد المؤسسات الإقليمية والدولية وما يتطلبه كل ذلك من سياسات واستراتيجيات وبرامج عمل. أشكركم مجددا باسمنا في مركز الجزيرة للدراسات وباسم زملائنا وأصدقائنا في معهد الشؤون الخارجية في إثيوبيا، وأتطلع إلى نقاش مفتوح عميق وثري، وأرجو أن يتواصل هذا التعاون بين مؤسستينا وبين باقي المؤسسات في المستقبل، وأن يتوسع ويترسخ. وأشكركم مجددا.
Thank you, sir. I believe the Arabic language is very rich and in expressive words, and thank you for gracing us with the language and presence. Today, it's a pleasure to see among us so many faces united by our shared purpose and passion. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development in Eastern Africa, IGAD, promotes regional cooperation and integration to add value to member states' efforts in achieving peace, security, and prosperity. I now invite to the stage IGAD's Peace and Security Director, His Excellency Commander Abebe Mulune, to pass his keynote. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Commander Abebe Mulune.
Your Excellency, Mr. Jafar Badru, Executive Director of Institute for Foreign Affairs, Your Excellency, Dr. Izzadin Abdul Mullah, Manager of Research at Jazeera Centre for Studies, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ratalemu, Director General of International Law at the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, distinguished participants, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the IGAD Secretariat and myself, I will begin my keynote speech today by expressing my cordial gratitude and that of the entire IGAD community and family to the government of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia for graciously accepting to host this conference. My special appreciation also goes to the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Al Jazeera Centre for Studies for organizing this high-level but very significant and important conference. At its core, fragility is the absence of breakdown of the social contract between people and their government. Fragile states suffer deficits of institutional capacity and political legitimacy that increase the risk of instability and violent conflict that sapping the state of resilience to disruptive shocks. It is frequently assumed that most of the developing African states experience sustained progress over time as their economies grow, their institutions consolidated, and poverty diminished. But for many, this is not simply the case. Those fragile states whose stagnation is so tenacious, despite generous aid programs and substantial and costly interventions, are stuck in fragility trap. States that are persistently fragile pose an unmet challenge to policy markets, theorists and analysts, because they show little indication of how they might exist from their political, economic, and social malice. This quote, a low-level equilibrium trapped states appear to be in perpetual political and economic limbo that can be last for years and several cases and decades. Of course, the source of this state-society dysfunction or fragility can be the absence of legitimacy and effectiveness, or both. Legitimacy is weakened when institutions are not inclusive and or responsive to the identity groups, including minority and marginalized population. Of course, repressive, corrupt states undermine citizen confidence in government. Therefore, effectiveness is diminished when state-society interaction fail to meet their citizens' needs and expectation for security, health, economic well-being, and social welfare. High levels of fragility, whether caused by ineffectiveness, illegitimacy, or both, create an enabling condition for armed conflict and political instability across Africa. Fragility is a common denominator of many of the steepest global challenges today. Several decades of research have identified the strong correlation of state fragility with higher level of violent conflict, extreme poverty, violent extremism, and greater vulnerability to the shocks of natural disasters, of the predation of regional and international powers. A growing number of indices directly measure state-society dysfunction and make it possible to track and rank key elements of fragility at the national and subnational levels. The combined insights from this assessment have clarified the stark statistical relationship between fragility and the multiple challenges to global development, peace, and security. Fragile states are responsible for the largest number of refugees and migrants, and among the largest source of terrorist attacks. A huge amount of people live in a fragile state or conflict-affected countries in poverty. People are seriously affected by natural disaster, live in a fragile and conflict-affected state. Actually, there are key political, social, and economic indicators of state fragility under 4 categories. The first one is cohesion indicators that focus on security apparatus, factionalized elites, and group grievances. The second one is economic indicators like economic decline, uneven development, and human fight and brain drain. The third one is political indicators such as state legitimacy, public service, and human rights and rule of law. Last but not least, the social and cross-cutting indicators like demographic pressure, refugees, and internal displaced peoples, and external interventions. Of course, after the attacks of 9/11, an easy consensus began to emerge among national security establishment, humanitarian and international development actors around state fragility as a unified theory and organizing principle by which to develop policy. Institutions building and economic development in places like Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan were understood not only as a humanitarian imperative, but also as a matter of national interest. Implicit to the argument was that state fragility incubates and grows at the outer edges of the rule-based international system, and if allowed to spread, could adversely affect the developed world through cross-border conflict, refugees, diseases, and radicalization. The concern drove aggressive counter-terrorism operations and provide the theoretical underpinnings to stabilization of operations. Furthermore, framing humanitarian operations and international development, including health, education, and infrastructure through the lens of fragility, provided to national security institutions behind what was previously seen as an opportunity to advance soft power through altruism. Stable countries in dangerous neighbors were designated as actors states and treated as a bulwark against chaos. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2023 Fragile States Index clearly demonstrates that fragility still matters and is not easily contained. Worryingly, this year, events undermine the facile notion or superficial notion that fragility is a threat that only spreads from poor countries. Instead, contagion went the other way around, as war in Europe led to the inflation, fuel riots, and food insecurity in vulnerable countries to the world. Further, we learned that great powers, whether that be China, Russia, or Western democracies, may be or more fragile than we think. The bounce back from the COVID recession, combined with economic disruptions due to the war in Ukraine, led to the highest rates of inflation since the 1990s, especially in Central Asia, the Caucasus, the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Inflation in Central Asia and the Caucasus was at 51.6%, which was a blow to countries that had demonstrated the greatest long-term improvement on the Fragile States Index. Over the last 2 decades, such as like Uzbekistan or the Kyrgyz Republic at the Russia-Ukraine war contributed to rising commodity prices. In the Middle East, inflation was estimated 14.5%, with especially high rates in Iran, Yemen, and Lebanon, Egypt, and Tunisia. In Africa, the inflation averaged 14.3%, the highest since 1996. Eastern Europe, inflation stood 14.2% due to increase in food and fuel prices. The last time global food price shock was evident in the Fragile States Index was in the run-up to the global recession of 2008, when oil prices were skyrocketing and food riots broke out in over a dozen countries of Latin America and the Caribbean to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. In 2022, according to the FAO, over 250 million of people in 58 countries faced acute food insecurity, a situation which has worsened for 4 years in a row and was exacerbated in 2022 by the war in Ukraine, a major producer of wheat and maize. Also, in 2022, over 90 countries experienced fuel riots, some of which were the same countries that had food riots in 2008, such as the Haiti, Peru, both which were among the most worsened on the Fragile State Index this year. Sri Lanka, which is the most worsened country this year after Ukraine, that is 4,000 miles away from the European theater of war, but was nevertheless adversely impacted when exacerbation of already brewing economic crisis that led to default loans, including those due to China as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and India, which then turned into full-blown of political crisis in 2022. China and the West have competed for influence, access to resource across the global South through loans, development, security resistance, assistance, and conditionalities for purpose of advancing their own respective national interests, such as trade, stabilization and counter-terrorism, where environmental, social, and governance standards are not prioritized, including human rights and conflict sensitivity. This had negative effects. Russia's Wagner Group, a paramilitary group that has also been involved in Africa, including Burkina Faso, allegedly in exchange of access to minerals. Although the Minister of Mines has denied the allegation, Burkina Faso had 2 separate coup d'etats in 2022. the first of which disposed President Rohnark Christian in January, and the second of which removed the interim President Paul Henry Sandago. Gambia. Other African countries that Wagner Group has allegedly been involved in include Mali, Central African Republic, and the Sudan. External intervention, including great powers and Middle Eastern countries, influenced the political, economic, and social situation in Africa. Thus, external actors driven by their interests and rivalries have shaped the country's peace and security landscape. Thus, African states would benefit more from cooperation with a favored nation, including the Gulf countries, rather than remaining fragmented. We have to know fragmentation allows to external manipulation. Thus, that further complicating the Africa's peace and security challenge and architecture. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to sum up, there are some critical issues that should be addressed by African leaders and elites, such as, number one, addressing the ongoing conflicts. Number two, combat the persistent threat posed by terrorist groups and violent extremist organizations. Number three, resolve unsettled border disputes. Number four, address the humanitarian needs and security concerns of refugees and internally displaced persons in Africa. Number five, respond to severe droughts and food insecurity which exacerbate instability, migration patterns, and resources scarcity. Number six, addressing human rights violations and atrocities by promoting justice and accountability for human rights violations committed during conflicts in order to prevent impunity. Number seven, addressing economic crisis by mitigating the impact of trade disruptions caused by conflicts or political tensions to prevent social unrest and further conflict. Number eight, coordinate responses to health emergencies with security and stability implications such as COVID-19 and other outbreaks like Ebola, malaria, cholera, and other contagious diseases. Number nine, manage conflicts over transboundary resources such as shared river basins. And number 10, mitigate the impact of external actors who may have strategic interests in the continent and could exacerbate conflicts that contribute to the flow of arms, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and weapons of mass destruction. By saying this, I thank you so much. May God bless us. May God bless Ethiopia in abundance.
Thank you so much, sir, for reviewing the fragility of the globe and the African security dynamics and for addressing a notable keynote. Going forward to the conference team official opening from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Director General of International Law Affairs. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Ambassador Retta Alamu.
Good morning, Excellencies, Excellency Atof Jafar Bedru, Executive Director of the Institute of Foreign Affairs, Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, all protocols observed. I would like to thank the Institute of Foreign Affairs for inviting us to take part in this deliberation. Africa and African conditions. Africa is the biggest continent on Earth in terms of its land mass, and in terms of its population size, it is the second largest continent in the world, with a population size over 1.5 billion. which is also projected to reach 2.5 billion in 25 years. As a home of 54 states, the continent is amazingly diverse in terms of its culture, history, political development, geography, language, natural resources, and other factors. In light of the current global dynamics, it's imperative to discern the various initiatives that African governments have taken to create institutional mechanisms to prevail over challenges they face. The African Union, the main continental organization, the nature of which drives the integration process, has been as a rational response by the main actors in the continent with many states to organize themselves as a global stage. The African Union plays a leading role in many of the African issues. The political commitment of its member states, the institutional and legal systems that are in place serve as the cornerstone of this resolve of African countries to shoulder the responsibility they have in their engagement at the international level. In spite of the strong challenges posed by the pandemic and the global economic recession, Africans are demonstrating the desire to be the drivers of their destiny. The measures taken by the African Union show that Africans are in charge of their own peace and security, in charge of their own economic development and other activities. In our age, the region has been facing multiple problems and challenges. Many countries have passed through long years of conflict that exposed the nations to continuous instability and fragility. This fragile nature of governance system created a sense of insecurity in many of the countries. The corrupt practices and the rising cost of living, which heightened inequalities, created tension among the populations. Lack of opportunities, especially for the youth, coupled with economic stagnation, compounded the poverty level in the continent. These problems could be surmounted by the hard work of the people and the determination of their governments. In this connection, Africans have charted their way. In the age of digital information and communication, the Africans have higher expectations for better life, and African states have set aspirations for their communities, nations, and the continent as a whole. The continent's socio-economic and political transformation has been the main agenda of the political leadership at various levels, and especially at the African Union. Africa has set the vision to turn the continent, its fortunes towards the betterment of the people. The aspirations was adopted in 2015 through the forward-looking 50 years continental framework known as Agenda 2063. This document provides a strategic framework for inclusive growth and sustainable development. Moreover, it provides a strategy for Africa to optimize the use of African resources for the benefit of all African people. The region, which was referred as the Dark Continent, has become known as the Rising Continent for the past few decades. In light of the economic development, many African countries have been thriving as a result of the common endeavor to build infrastructure in terms of hardware and software. Several housing and urbanization projects, new roads, railways, airports, and are practical examples of the economic projections that we see in Africa. The pace of electrification ventures the boost in the telecommunication sector, and the advancement in the banking and financial industry clearly indicate the transformation in Africa. The fierce competition among global powers for resources in Africa, and the continent which is endowed with ample mineral and precious stones, remains to be the source of many problems and challenges that we see in Africa. The complex battle among powerful actors to secure markets in Africa impacted our efforts and the efforts by many countries to promote the manufacturing and industrial sectors. The new approach is more prevalent through trade and investment, which spans in many areas, including largely in the food and agricultural sector, in the manufacturing industry, in the health and pharmaceutical sectors, and even in the area of military and armament sector. There are several frameworks at the continental level that would enable African countries to address the development and the key sectors that would also help promote their developmental goals. Apart from agriculture and manufacturing, some sectors including transport, energy, and mining are also open for investment from various partners. There are discussions among African nations to increase their comparative advantages and ensure coherence and convergence, where these frameworks can be categorized in some priority areas. According to the African Union, there have been many demands to create strategic partnership with African nations. These frameworks for partnership can be categorized in 4 sectors. The first one is the continent-to-continent level partnership, where we see Africa-Europe partnership, Africa-Asia partnership, Africa-South America partnership. The second tier is partnership at country level, like Africa-China partnership, Africa-India partnership, Africa-Turkey, Africa-Japan, Africa-US, Africa-France, and so on. The third partnership tier is divided into 2 components, one conceptually, like the Afro-Arab partnership and Afro-Caribbean partnership, which also has distinct nature. The fourth form of partnership is the one involving, which is also with other institutions, both international and regional organizations. African nations are working in tandem with Global South to address the common challenges that they have. The countries in the Middle East have the financial resources that could help African countries to boost their economy. Hence, it is imperative to consider how we can promote investment and trade among the 2 actors. African states need to be the owners and drivers of their own economic development, working in collaboration with partners in the Middle East. Africa shall set the stage to enhance the production capacity both in agriculture and industrial goods, which can also reach into the markets of the Middle East. Many diplomats, scholars, and political analysts assert that Africa is the new frontier in the global economic growth. As the home of many of the fastest growing economies, there are huge amounts of untapped potential for investment and trade in various sectors. This would be one of the important bridges connecting the African continent with Middle Eastern countries. In that context, we expect that there will be a focus in our deliberations on this matter. African countries have better strategic disposition to diversify their economies and build new infrastructure in sectors such as energy, mining, information and communication technology. African countries need efficient banking and financial sectors to mobilize resources and increase domestic savings. In order to advance prosperity, it is important to enhance their trading capacities. The African Continental Free Trade and Common Market Area is the largest free trade and market in the world, which encompasses a population of 1.5 billion, and which has also 3 trillion combined GDP. Africa must work to overcome the digital divide, and in the age of information communication technology, Africans must learn to use currently available resources to leverage them to advance to bridge the gap. The young and growing population in Africa contains a massive workforce that is readily available to the evolving economics in changing world, especially in the Middle East. In light of the demographic shift, the African nations are emerging with young and progressive societies embracing new civilization while maintaining the traditional communal systems and values. It's critical to use this young and educated workforce to engage in the innovation and technology to advance our economic profile. The geographic proximity between the Middle East, Arab countries, and Africa, the cultural and societal relationship would serve as a basis to enhance the engagement in all sectors. The discussions today will provide us better insight on how to promote this relationship. Ethiopia, as a key player in the African continent and at the right place as a gateway to the African diplomacy, sets the stage for these discussions. And I would like to say that the pursuit for freedom, justice, and prosperity in Africa is continuing. We are set to realize that the African Union vision for a prosperous, united, and integrated continent. The discussions in this forum would enable us to assess the practical challenges and design strategies to achieve our vision. I hope we will have fruitful discussions, and I believe that the deliberations will be used by policymakers. I would like to thank the organizers of this event, and I would also like to thank you for this, for attending this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the remarkable speech. Honorable guests and panelists. 30 minutes of refreshment break.